Hey, I'm 𝗜𝗂𝘁𝗲𝗄, and you're watching Keto and Crime.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today we have 𝗜𝗼 by Chad Daybell. This was the very first novel that Chad Daybell ever wrote. It is 143 pages on a Kindle. So given the size of the paper, if you actually put that on notebook paper, it's probably going to come in about 100 pages. This was a very short book, but it was hard to get through because the story is convoluted and all over the place, but we are going to try to make sense of it. Now, the most important thing to know about this book is it's based off the character Emma North that we saw in the series we read last time, the Standing in Holy Places, Standing on Holy Ground series. She was the one married to Tad, and he had renamed the Utah Jazz the Grizzlies. That's for my good friend Kat out there. But yeah, that one. Well, this series of books is about her and her brother Doug, who ended up being an integral part of that series and one of the prophets that helped save, Israel and the lost tribes and all that stuff. Well, this is their backstory. So there is a Daybell universe, evidently. And so this is what this is. This is his very first novel, and we're going to get through it together. It's quite hilarious. Anyway, let's jump right in. Okay, this opens sometime in the 21st century in Springville, Utah, because of course. Basically, 𝗜𝗼 is talking. She's talking about attending the local high school and now attending Brigham Young University as well. And then she's going back telling us about an adventure she had, the adventure we're going to talk about. And she first starts telling us about two elderly ladies, Beth and Leah Jensen. These were unmarried sisters, Mormon sisters that have lived together their entire life. They were teachers at the high school. They called them the fire and ice teachers because one was hot and the other wasn't. I have never really explained that, but okay, whatever. Anyway, Leah would have conversations with 𝗜𝗼 and tell her that she wasn't allowed to date until she was 16, and that she had gone steady with this man named Harold Milton, who was drafted into the Great War. I'm assuming that's World War II, and he wanted to marry her, but she didn't want to, and so basically he wanted to marry her before he shipped off to war. She didn't want to, so basically she agreed to marry him upon his return, but he died. And so, in my opinion, this is Chad Daybell guilting women into following their own desires and their own heart, and you should marry this person because they're going off to war. Literally, that's what he's doing, is putting a huge guilt trip on women for daring not to marry a man that's going off to war. Now, I'm all for, giving people love and everything, but why should it come at the expense of one? And this Leah has evidently carried this guilt for the majority of her life, having never married again. So again, I think he's setting this up as a cautionary tale to, you better marry them boys, girls, because they might die tomorrow. Typical Chad Daybell. And then Leah shows her a silver band around her left hand, saying that she kept her promise to him and did marry him in her heart, so therefore she's never married. Again, Chad Daybell is romanticizing some gothic tale that Tennessee Williams would write, or Flannery O'Connor. making women feel guilty about not wanting to marry somebody. Okay, so then we fast forward a few days to July 20th in whatever year this is in, and they get a phone call, and Emma's mother answers it, and it's Beth, Leah's sister, who is asking for help. The mother runs over to their house, and basically she's dead of a heart attack. They try to revive her. The paramedics can't revive her, and Leah is dead. Nice beginning, Chad. Let's make her regret not marrying this man her whole life and then kill her. Yeah, that's way to go, Chad. So anyway, at her funeral, Leah is moved by all the beautiful eulogies and how she had been her anchor and somebody that she talked to and had helped her regain her self-esteem. Then she talks a little bit about her parents, who are an electrician and a homemaker, because that's what Chad likes to do with women, is keep them home, even though Tammy earned the majority of their family's money. Chad, you talk a good talk, but when it comes to walking it, you're always a little bit behind, my man. Anyway, and then we get into this long thing about Doug, Emma's brother, who is also in the second series that we read. And he's evidently really good at baseball. And he's actually very good. He hits a lot of triples and doubles, and as a and in true Daybell style, they have a nickname for him, Double D. Of course, this is a Daybell novel. Double D. Double D is Doug's name. So good old Double D Doug. I wish I had known that when I read the first series we read, because I would have had some fun with that. But Double D Dalton, Double D Doug. He won Best Athlete junior and senior year, and I'm really going to have some fun when I read the second book in this series about Doug. But yeah, hit a homer, hit a double, and was named after a woman's chest size. Way to go, Chad. Then we cut back to Miss Leah's funeral, and Emma is placing a red rose on her casket when she hears Leah's voice from beyond the veil tell her, "Emma, you've got a mission to perform that will someday mean more than all of Doug's hits, touchdowns, baskets, home runs. Anything that boy has done in sports, you will top by a life-saving mission. Do not fear." And then she has this whole inner dialogue where she's worried that she's losing her mind because she can hear these voices. Yeah, that's called schizophrenia, Emma. Only in a Chad Daybell novel would hearing voices and talking to oneself out loud and answering oneself be deemed, I hate to use the word normal, but yeah, normal. Only in a Daybell novel would all that be considered coof. But anyway, so she's thinking in her room that night after the funeral. She's thinking back to her family. She's thinking about being descended from Finneady Dalton, who we also met in that novel where he came back to life during the Great Gathering and helped Christ. So Finneady's out there, and she's thinking about him. But evidently, there's some missing history of Finneady's family. There wasn't a distinctive history. And if you know anything about LDS culture, you know how important genealogy and being able to trace your family is. So the fact that some of Finneady's history is missing is considered a blight on the Dalton family. So keep that in mind as we move forward in this book. What we do know about Finneady is the family left England and moved to Utah in 1864. They were a pioneer family. They loved horses and the outdoors because as a pioneer you had a choice not to be outdoors, I suppose, in Chad Daybell's word. And then she fast forward to herself. That's really all they know. And again, that is considered kind of bad because you can't trace it back any further than that. Then she talks about how she has too much free time on her hands, how, idle hands are the devil's workshop, and that how her grandpa Keith Dalton was very proud of her, and then she would be graduating from high school in May and then starting BYU in the fall. Then Fast forward to her senior prom, where a boy got a little bit too forward with her, and she left. Good girl. Good girl. And then she started talking about getting a job where she worked at the local hoagie shop. 𝗠𝘂𝘀𝗶𝗰𝗍𝗍. 𝗠𝘂𝘀𝗶𝗍𝗍. Oh, Chad. Even your writing's lazy. So, anyway, she found that job a little stressful. Boo-boo. In the picnic basket. She finds that a little stressful. I'm assuming because she's a girl and this is a Daybell novel. And then she goes on to tell how she works from noon to 8 p.m. She had lots of free times in the morning, even started watching soap operas and trying to fill the void in her life with The Young and the Restless. Riveting, Chad. Absolutely riveting literature. Then we cut to her arguing with Doug about the contents of the Book of Mormon. She said it took her about 2 chapters to truly get a grasp on the book's writing style. Yeah, it took me longer than that to get a grasp of the book's writing style when I attempted to read it. And then they get to that part, we talked about a lot of the contents of the Book of Mormon when we went over Jason Mow's book. But, Nephi cut off Laban's head in the 4th chapter. He came there, he became the forerunner of the 𝗜𝗍𝗽𝗁, who were in war with the Lamanites, all that good stuff. The Nephites who were in war with the Lamanites. Yeah, just all of that. Anyway, so she was talking about how the Book of Mormon would make a great movie. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. No. And it would have at least a PG-13 rating. I think it would have an R rating. If you really described what was in the Book of Mormon and in the Bible, for that matter, particularly in the Old Testament, I think you would, if you really graphically depicted it, you're looking at an R rating, not PG-13. Just saying. How many times were the firstborn killed in the Old Testament and in the New Testament? That's not exactly good for kids to see. Anyway, she's talking about how it took her a few months to read it, but of course Doug read it twice as fast because he's double D. And she was really feeling down on herself about this. I don't understand why, but she was. So they're trying to find out more about their ancestors. They did discover that one branch of their mother's family were living in Rhode Island in the 1850s, and then that they were also from England, and then the side of her mother's family also disappears. So there's no record either of Finity Dalton's family or her mother's family, so they're just in a double conundrum of genealogy, and I guess that's really a bad thing. But anyway, so Emma says a prayer, and what she prays for is a way to find out more about Finity Dalton's background and about the Coopers, which were her mother's family, so that they could be more elite in the temple, I suppose. And then we cut to a hiking trip where a hawk attacks her. A hawk. It just swoops down and attacks her. And she's running from the hawk, and she's sobbing, yelling for, I don't know where her parents are, that she's being attacked by a hawk, but she's being attacked by a hawk. She started crying over Leah, over Double D, over everything that she had done wrong, over not having a family tree. And she sobbed so long that her throat went dry. She ran to the stream to get a drink. All while this hawk's evidently dive bombing her. She trips, she falls, everything goes black. And then she wakes up on the edge of that same river, but something's different. She looks around. She says, things just seem younger. And the terrain was very rough. She didn't see any established trails like there were before. That hawk is nowhere to be seen. Everything's overgrown. It's just weird. She managed to pull herself up and get to the edge. And while she's sitting there trying to figure out what's going on, she hears a noise. She sees a couple of covered wagons and some men on horseback riding toward her. If you haven't figured it out yet, she's gone back in time to the 1800s in Utah, to about the time the Mormons started setting up settlements en masse. And a man on a horse rides out from the wagons and yells, "Slow down, Nellie," to his horse. Chad, Nellie, that's the most creative horse name you could come up with. Nellie. Okay, she's cowering, she's hiding, but the man sees her and shouts out to her, "Who are you and what are you doing there?" As you would when you see somebody in evidently modern garb or outlandish garb based on your time period, soaking wet next to the water, as you would. She noted that the man was in his 60s. He appeared to be kind of muscular, long gray beard, twinkling blue eyes. He had on suspenders and a hat. Is that all he had on? Anyway, he introduces himself. And he goes, "I'm President Brigham Young." Of course, this is a Chad Daybell novel. Of course, it's either going to be Brigham Young, Joseph Smith, or Jesus. Those are the only three choices. And he asks, "What's your name, young lady?" And she answers, "I'm Emma Dalton." And he goes, "Well, you've got quite a bad bump on your forehead, and it looks like you've been through a mud hole. Let us help you." So she said she was a little dazed and confused, but she goes with them, and they take her to the home of the Johnsons, another pioneer family in this Mormon conclave somewhere in Utah. Turns out it's spring, 1868, and she's near the newly formed town of Springville, Utah. Anyway, she visits the Johnsons. They kind of patch her up. They gave her more appropriate dress. And then she accompanies Brigham Young, because that's exactly what a leader of a large organization would do, is take a stranger into his midst and let her travel all around with him. That's exactly the safe thing he should do. And takes her into Springville, where she is amazed because he brings gifts of food and toys and likes to greet the children, and literally tells her, "If a child approaches me, I want them to feel my love." That has a whole different meaning in our day and age. But okay, she watches how great Brigham Young is, just the second coming of Jesus when it comes to these people. He's just great and loved, and she watches him work the crowd and realizes that she's in the presence of greatness. Back to the Johnson's house, and she's asleep in a room that they gave her. She's having a nightmare where she talks to Leah, and Leah tells her that she's got a mission ahead of her and not to be scared. Then Leah disappears, and she wakes up screaming and yelling, as you were if you had suddenly fell through a time portal. And Leah comes in and asks her, "Is everything okay?" And she goes, yeah. So they bring her out, and there is a bishop in the Mormon church by the name of Aaron Johnson. And the Johnsons introduce him to her, and basically they apologize. They stand up. They tell her all about Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, and they're very, very cordial to this strange young girl that has just appeared out of nowhere. I don't think, and they actually invite her into this meeting. Brigham Young's there, this bishop's there, and they actually invite this stranger into a meeting where they're actually going to talk about like official policy. Plot hole. Say it with me. Plot hole. That would never happen. And they want to hear her story. So she tells them the whole outlandish story about being from future Springville, which has 30,000 people in it, and nearby Provo, which has 100,000 residents in it, and that she's going to BYU. And Brigham Young says, "What's BYU?" And she goes, "Oh, it's Brigham Young University, named after you. 27,000 students. I'm going there in the fall. It's in Provo, and there's also one in Idaho." And he goes, "Brigham Young, really? Wow, named after me, huh? Wow." So anyway, they actually believe her. And then she tells them how the church has 60,000 missionaries preaching the gospel all over the world, how young people still do their missions, and they don't string her up as a witch. Plot hole! There's no way these 1800 prairie folk aren't going to think they're in the midst of a crazy person or a witch. And they're just open and understanding about all this. Now, I've seen pictures and paintings of Brigham Young. He does not look that understanding to me. But maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm judging a book by its cover. But none of this is plausible. We're talking about time travel here. Come back to Earth, Tracy. This is Chad Daybell. Nothing is going to make sense. And this book makes less sense than anything else I've read by him. But as if he was Obi-Wan Kenobi, Brigham Young tells her, if you go to Denver, you'll find the answers that you seek. And she goes, I don't know what answers I'm seeking other than how to get me home. And he basically says, if you wait here a day or two, we will send people with you, and we will help you get to Denver, and there you will find the answers that you seek. We know your ancestor, 𝗫𝗍 Dalton. And evidently, old 𝗫𝗍 was near Denver, and she says she had no idea that he lived near Denver. Well, there's some of your missing genealogy. So anyway, wait a couple of days, and we'll send you to Denver, and you'll find the answers you seek by meeting your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. It's a Daybell novel. It's full of plot holes. But before they leave, they take her to a picnic in Provo, because it's exactly what you do with this strange person that's talking out of her head. You take her to a community picnic. And basically, she meets Joseph F. Smith. I don't know. I'm figuring he's probably a descendant of the Joseph Smith, but I don't know. Any of my LDS friends down below, let me know. And basically, she's also introduced to the two Johnson sons, Will and Moses, who are 18 and 8. And they're sending them to escort her to Denver. An 8-year-old. Okay. So they get on some horses, and they head for 𝗫𝗍 Dalton's settlement somewhere near Denver. Before they leave, Mom Rachel packs a bunch of supplies, including sandwiches. Okay, Yogi's Hoagies, now sandwiches. And if you remember our readings of the 2 previous Chad Daybell series, there was a lot of sandwiches in those as well. I don't know what's up with Daybell and sandwiches. I like sandwiches. I'm down with sandwiches. But Daybell has this uncanny belief in sandwiches. I'm wondering if he's getting the manwiches in prison right now. But won't. Anyway. So they ride off, and Emma ascertains right away that Will is the most serious of the 2 brothers. Now remember, Will is 18, as opposed to his 8-year-old brother Moses. And she is literally surprised that the 18-year-old is the more serious of the 2. Emma ain't too bright. And then she's talking to them about how she was never one of the most popular girls in high school. We don't care. We don't care. We just want to know how you ended up in the 1800s and what this mission is. And do you make it? And hopefully that 8-year-old boy doesn't get killed in the process. That's all I care about at this point. So they end up having a race. And Will beats Emma. And then they have a swim, and she almost drowns again, so he pulls her out. And then they have another race where he again beats her. I don't know what the purpose of any of that was, because the character development is non-existent in this book anyway, so no amount of shenanigans that Chad Daybell can throw in here is going to make these characters mean any more to me as a reader. But yet, somehow I have to know that they beat her twice in a horse race. So I guess what Chad is saying, in his world, these two Mormon boys are the superior riders of asses. And then they camp. Just thrown in there, matter-of-factly. And then she teases them about eating like pigs, and they throw mud at her. And then there's like 10 more pages of shenanigans that I don't really care about, and it doesn't make any of these characters more endearing or deep. And then the next day, and I think by this time they've been on the road for 3 days, they reach a small farm with a small farmhouse and a brand new barn. And they take a stop. And so, here we meet 𝗓𝘂𝘁 and his wife, 𝗓𝘂𝘁 and Mary Dalton. They have dinner with them, and Will and Moses tell them all about life up near Provo and Springville, and then they leave. Basically, they need to start back that very night so they can get home within 2 days, because their dad wants them home as soon as possible. Then why did he send them off on horseback? On a strange journey with this crazy woman talking out of her head. Anyway, they both leave, and basically Emma's hanging out with her great-great-great-great-grandfather. And she meets her cousin, who is named Esther, and Esther's telling her all about her crush on a local boy named David North. Now, if that sounds familiar, that is the last name of her future husband, Tad. Keep that in mind. It's about to get weird and freaky up in here, people. Basically, David North comes over, and she meets him, and she thinks he's nice, and basically, 𝗓𝘂𝘁 says that they're going to send her on to Denver to find the other half of her mission, and that is to find the history of her mother's people, the Coopers. So that answer's in Denver. So David volunteers to go with her to escort her. And this is the great-great-great-grandfather of her future husband, Tad. Suspiciously rhymes with Chad. So they leave for Denver, and they also George Dalton goes with them. That is 𝗓𝘂𝘁's oldest son. So there's 3 of them: George, Emma, and David. And they're horseplaying all the way across. More horseplay. They camp near Fort Bridger. They meet some Native American kids, and they play with them. More horseplay. So it's horseplay all over Utah. And then while they're riding, basically David and George tell her the history of the Mormon Trail from Springville to Denver, where the U.S. Army built it along with immigrant aid. Sure, he means the Chinese, and he makes it sound so nice. But anyway, so I'm endured to about 20 pages of history on that trail. If it's even true. I don't trust anything that Daybell writes. They find an old gold mine, because this is, near the gold rush days, and basically this guy named Isaac Webster basically pulls a gun on them and tells them to get the heck out of there. He's not sharing any of his bounty with them, so, okay. They move on. They make it to Denver. They hitch up their horses outside and go to a saloon. And the 3 of them state right away that the saloon smells bad. It smells like cigar smoke and alcohol and cheap perfume. What do you think a saloon's going to smell like? It's a bar. Ugh. So they go in. They say they're going to order a meal. They talk to the bartender. The bartender tells them about this strange lady by the name of Sheridan that's been poking around. It favors Emma somewhat, so they think that might be a clue. Basically, they sit at a table. A waitress comes up to take their order, and she asks them what they would like to eat. They order steak and mashed potatoes. That sounds pretty good to me. And then she asks what they would have to drink, beer, wine, or whiskey. We'll just have water. That's water. In an Old West saloon. Did you never watch the old Bugs Bunny cartoons where he ordered milk and got shot? I mean, come on. So she brings them some very dirty looking water that looked like it had come out of a puddle. Remember, this is before water filtration. And anyway, they continue to look for this woman named 𝗟𝗏 Sheridan, who looks like Emma. And they finally do find her, but she's married to this man by the name of 𝗵𝗁 Sheridan, and they're gold smugglers, and their whole plan is to work with Isaac that they just met back at the mine to rip off until they can rip off his gold. And unfortunately, because they find out too much, I don't know why all this information was volunteered, but they find out too much and they take them all hostage. All three of them are hostage now by these gold smugglers. One of them is evidently related to Emma. Yeah, this story just goes in circles and circles and triangles and squares and rectangles. So it turns out that this guy Larry, so Larry and Harry, Larry is helping him, but he's just some kind of hired gun. And Emma realizes that 𝗟𝗏 and 𝗵𝗁 Sheridan are the missing links in her family. Of course they are. We knew that was going to happen. And so they start trying to bargain with this hired man named Larry that says, do you really think they're going to let you get away with your share of the gold? No, they're going to kill you. So you might as well just let us go and then grab what gold you can and leave. And so they convince this dude to basically turn on these people that have hired him to help make off with this gold and end up letting them go. So he takes his gold and he leaves. This is the most convoluted story. And so basically Harry and his little cohorts come back and there ends up being a fight in which David is hit over the head with a club, but not before they get away. And it's a good thing they did, because the whole plan was to put Emma, George, and David on horses and send them over a cliff. Somehow during all this, that was ascertained. And so they manage to get away. They go to the local hotel. They get a room. They hold up. Turns out that George had managed to steal some of the gold, and they were able to get a hotel room. And then he says he's going to go out looking for supplies. So they leave David asleep in the hotel, and they both go out. Meanwhile, Harry realizes that they're gone. He goes back to the saloon where their horses were tied, and he steals them. So there they are. So they're looking for supplies, and then, of course, Emma gets the brilliant idea of going to have a conversation with 𝗟𝗏, the person they're running from, about how they're related, because that's sensible, and how to get out of this. But before she leaves, she goes up to David, who's unconscious on the bed because he was hit over the head with a club, and kissed him. This is every Disney princess in reverse. And this is the great-great-grandfather of her future husband. Keep that in mind. This is how Chad thinks. Anyway, basically, George and Emma trace 𝗟𝗏 and 𝗵𝗁 Sheridan to a apartment over a saloon. Emma goes up to talk to 𝗟𝗏, and they, sure enough, they're cousins. And for some reason, 𝗟𝗏 believes this cockamamie story that Emma's telling her, and that she tells her all about their family from England to Rhode Island and how they ended up out west. So basically, 𝗟𝗏 fills in all the missing history of her mother's family. And now Emma's writing all this down, and now she has the complete genealogy of her mother's family, as well as now being able to fill in the missing history of Finity, because she's seen where he lives and how far they are from Denver. So she's getting all this missing information, which is so important to her salvation for some reason. And so she leaves. George and David approach with horses and supplies that they had managed to trade that gold for. Henry gets there. He's angry. He pulls a gun. 𝗟𝗏 says that if he hurts them, that their marriage is over, and for some reason he drops the gun, and they embrace, and they kiss, and they say they're going to stay there and open a hotel together. Think about the name. Sheridan. Is Chad Daybell alleging that these people were the forerunners of the Sheraton? Really, Chad? Really? It's about as believable as the Grizzlies. George, David, and Emma start heading home. Emma starts falling in love with David on the way. They get to Fort Bridger, where they camp with some other LDS peeps. Some Native Americans come in and take them hostage because they're getting revenge for the murder of two of their people a few days earlier. And somehow Emma saves them by singing a Mormon song that took up about 4 to 5 pages of this book. I kid you not. The whole song. So, they decide not to kill them, but they steal their horses and supplies. So, they leave them alone. They catch fish. They manage to meet another Mormon family coming through there who just gives them horses, because evidently people just give away horses. And then they manage to make their way back to Finnity's cabin, where they tell the story of Larry, Harry, Isaac, Esther, and I guess now the Sheraton Hotel. But Elizabeth kind of shares, Elizabeth, their daughter, shares her room with Emma, and Emma asks her more about David, and she says, oh, I'm not in love with David anymore. You can have David. Blah, blah, blah. So now Emma has the dilemma of being in love with one of her future husband's ancestors. David is also confused. He says he wants to marry Emma. Emma runs from him, says this can't happen. This is not what was supposed to happen. She runs. She trips. She falls in a lake. She wakes up in the future where she left from. Again, muddy clothes, muddy water. Her family help her. They take her to the ER. She tells part of the story, but not all the story. They chalk it up to being a dream. And then she ends up at BYU, where she meets a man named Tad. And he wants to marry her. So we fast forward a few years. He wants to marry her. Oh, and she was able to relay all the information she got about their families to her parents, and they believe that. But Tad wants to marry her. She can't because she's still in love with David, and she confesses everything to Tad, saying that she believes she was once in love and met his great-great-great-great-grandfather. Tad, of course, thinks she's crazy and leaves. Then he comes back the next day and proposes again because he found a diary that his grandfather gave him that was passed down from his great-great-great-great-grandfather, and it was written by David North, and it mentions Emma and how she was the only woman he ever loved until he met his beloved wife, Janine, which was his great-great-great-grandmother. And so Tad realizes the entire story was true, and they get married only to live happily ever after, never, until we get to standing in holy places when the entire world goes to hell. And that is an errand for Emma. Okay. I hope you enjoyed that. That was some dribble. I will be back next week where I will read the second book in the series about Double D Doug. And then that will set the course for the future books, which we've already written. You can find them all in the playlist that I'll link up here. And I hope you enjoyed that. But again, thank you so much for joining me. A big shout out to everyone. I couldn't do this without you. And I'll see you next time. Keto and Crime from Florida.